Hello. So this week we are talking about the city of Traverse City, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Traverse City. So, Traverse City has not been around for a really long time, back in the beginning of the 18th century. So that's almost 200 years ago. The Ojibwa and Ottawa Indians and Indian and French traders were the first people to visit Traverse City, but they would just be kind of moving through. And they gave the region the name La Grande Traverse because of the long crossing they had to make to cross the bay. So that was in the early 18th century, in the 1800s. It wasn't until 1839 that the first person actually moved to or was living in Traverse City, and that was Peter Doherty and the tip of Old Mission. And you can see this is the house. It's still there. It's a historical a historical place on Old Mission Peninsula, and that's the Doherty home. So Old Mission and Traverse City was becoming a sawmill town. There was lumber and there was sawmill, and the waterways were used a lot at that point. Then things began to grow and grow. There was a lighthouse in the Old Mission that was built in 1870 to warn ships away from the rocky shoals of Old Mission Point. And by 1847, a small but growing community was forming on the banks of the Boardman River. In 1852, the little small sawmill town was named Traverse City. But it was pretty remote. It was pretty hard to get to until Perry Hanna came to town. And this is the Perry Hanna house that you see on 6th Street. Perry Hanna, that was in about 1893. He is known to be the father of Traverse City. And at this time, Traverse City began to grow and grow in agriculture. There was still the lumber and the sawmill, but there was also beginning to be potatoes and apples grown in this area and cherries. In 1885, there was a decision made for the asylum, the Northern Michigan, the state asylum, a hospital for people who were in need that was going to be built in Traverse City. And that was a really big thing for the town of Traverse City, and it had a lot of growth that came with it. The asylum, or is what we would now call the Grand Traverse Commons, where there are many old buildings and things like that that have a lot of history of our town. The first Cherry Festival was in 1925, and the airport in Traverse City was built in 1929.